Hello and welcome back. Before we get to part 2, Real Talk, please allow us to fulfill our capitalistic duty and plug our Patreon, the Contrarian Supplements.
That's right. For a small fee, you too can help the Contrarians rage on.
We have tiers ranging from just $1 to $10. It all depends on how much content you can handle.
Starting at $1, it's a Travoltis tier, which gets you access to new bonus episodes focusing on a new movie every month, as well as access to the patron chat. Join other patrons in making fun of our opinions.
Moving up to $3 is the Winoni's tier, which unlocks access to our pre-recording notes, our video reviews, and our spin-off show, Contrarians After Hours.
That's a more laid-back space where we talk about other things we've been watching, reading, playing, thinking about. Sometimes it's related to the movies being covered in the main feed, but it usually isn't.
If you want to be part of those patrons who help us shape the show by telling us which movies to tackle, that's when you sign up for the $5 tier, the Embries, and the $10, the Gads.
Finally, all supplement subscribers, regardless of the tier, get access to our archive of special patron projects. Head over to patreon.com/contrarianprime now to join.
Be sure to listen through the end of the episode to find out what's coming up to the Contrarian Supplements this month. Now, it's time for some Real Talk.
Creasy? What's a concubine?
Why do you ask?
It's in my history book.
Oh,
It's like a wife, right?
yeah. It's, let me see. Number wife.
Right there. But the Emperor of China had 1,000 of them.
Okay, like nowadays in the West, they have one husband for one wife, but in the olden time cultures, they had, different rules. Why, you feel sorry for the husband?
Yeah, can you imagine my mom multiplied by 1,000? Creasy. You're smiling.
What?
You were smiling.
No, I'm not.
You were.
No, I was not.
You're not now, but you were.
No, you were smiling. I wasn't
You
smiling.
were.
When?
Like 5 seconds ago.
All right, Julio, we are back. This is a far cry from Ricochet, but something tells me you're going to be on the opposite side, of that coin.
Why? Because this makes slightly more sense than the story in Ricochet.
Because it's an hour longer than Ricochet, and you're like, oh yes, look at the the author traits. Look at the Bourne cam here, because that's, you are so much more forgiving of that shit than I am. And I'm not even gonna blame this, but this isn't a modern movie still using it, but like the saturation and shit, like it's just like, I told you I watched The Passion of the Christ for the first time last year.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to the very obvious things that are wrong with that movie, one of the big things is like all of the really hot filmmaking trends of the early 2000s, which include the oversaturation, or those things where you speed it up to slow it down, or you slow it down and then speed it up. And, and that's all here. I just couldn't help, and it's obviously how we're starting Real Talk here. I couldn't help but shake the feeling that you were going to tell me this was better than Ricochet, and I was like I was already mad. I was like preliminarily upset and formulating my arguments.
Or resenting the movie for something that the movie had no control over.
Exactly.
It's such a different movie. It's almost an unfair comparison.
Yes, that's obviously true.
I think, I can't even say that it's going to be a more interesting discussion than the Ricochet, because they're going for such different things. But obviously, it's a movie that takes itself more seriously than Ricochet. And so,
am I too like off on my own shit, or would you agree it's a time stamp, a time capsule of filmmaking in the early 2000s?
I think it's a time capsule of Tony Scott filmmaking. That is more so than the 2000s. When I watch a movie like this, I'm like, it's so Tony Scott for better and for worse. Like, just that. And honestly, I don't know. Well, I do know, because I've seen stuff like Top Gun, right? That's like a very early movie of his.
Yeah.
But, True Romance, I feel like latter day Tony Scott can be like this, where it's just like, my God, calm down, man. just you can tell the story in a more chill way and still convey everything that you need to convey. I don't understand the purpose behind such a chaotic approach to like visual approach to telling a story, other than, well, I like it, like Baz Luhrmann, he has a very specific way of like shooting things, and you can hate it, you can love it.
This is true.
It's very much Baz Luhrmann. And so why does he do it like that? Well, because he likes it. That's how he makes movies. So why did Tony Scott shoot Man on Fire like this? Because that's what he does. I guess, you can kind of like go with the standard. Oh, it's meant to represent how chaotic the streets of Mexico are, or the chaotic mental state of Denzel as he spirals. Because there are a few moments where it's just calm, like especially some interactions that he has with Dakota Fanning, where everything kind of calms down and is shot like a normal movie. There might be something to what I said in Contrast Corner, where the contrast is the whole point of it. You just have the movie shot like with these really ugly filters, most of it, so that when you stop and there's something that looks kind of pretty and nice, it's highlighted. But yeah, I mean, give me some examples. I mean, what other movies does this remind you of?
The first Transformers.
Oh yeah.
I'm just thinking of like even I already dropped the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's some parts in that really just overly color washed, and
Domino.
it was,
that's another one. That's
Domino,
also Tony Scott.
That's Tony Scott as well. But yeah, there's a lot of things of this time period that are overly saturated, and not in terms of story. I mean, like literally, like these fuckers figured out lens flares, and yeah, Zack Snyder was as guilty of that shit too. It just feels like they're tropes, right? You see like a movie poster where it's a set of like a girl's legs and it's two guys like staring through it. You're like, oh, that's such an 80s thing, And the camera work in a lot of this movie, just I feel like I'm in high school back at a movie theater, with my friends or my girlfriend at the time or whatever, just going to see the movies, and this is how they make them now.
Enemy of the State. That's another one. I'm looking through his IMDb page.
Yeah, maybe it's just Tony Scott's just burned into my brain. Maybe it's not the filmmaking of the time, but I can think of other prolific filmmakers at this point in time that really relied on this idea of excess in artistry, if that makes any sense. We talk about excess in other aspects of filmmaking, but that's that's not exclusive to this time period. We're talking about a movie from 2004 right now, so yeah, it's of this. That's what we're fixated on, but that's every era of filmmaking. When they discover something new, everyone's going to try to do their own version of it, and it's there's just a lot of trappings of this time period that when you go and watch movies like this, it's very present and pronounced.
The word that kept coming to me while I was watching it was overproduced. That's what I felt.
Oh,
like.
Yeah, man. And, the Bourne cam is there, obviously, because that had reinvented the game. I don't want to say trying too hard, because that means something. We just did an episode on a movie that's trying too hard. This is just it comes across like it seems like a kid who was given too many crayons and just went crazy with all of them, to where it just.
But he's not a kid though. That's it, right? Like yeah. Tony Scott has by the time that he made Man on Fire,
I'm trying to be gentle here, man. I'm trying to just make
by infantilizing him. So condescending. He's just a child. He didn't know what he was doing.
He didn't know any better.
I see what you're saying. I mean, the overall feeling, and it's not just Man on Fire. When you see something like that, it does feel like somebody that just went crazy at the candy shop or whatever. But when I see it, honestly, that's what I think of. Is like, oh, they're trying to be Tony Scott.
Yeah.
So he gets at least that distinction of having gotten there first.
I want to expose them. I want you to talk to me, give me your story, and then I can help you. Please.
Help me do what?
Goddamn, Julio, we've already gotten 8 minutes ahead of ourselves here. We got some quotes to discuss.
Yes, we do.
Who was in favor of this? Because obviously we treated it as rotten in the first half. What were the positive quotes of this?
Well, there are a few critics that jumped to the defense of Denzel and Tony Scott. Let's start with James Rocci from Netflix. It's not from Netflix. This always cracks me up when we pull up James Rocci's quotes and it just says Netflix. Netflix is not an outlet for reviews. Anyway, he said Denzel Washington is walking death in Tony Scott's showy but chillingly real revenge film. Is this movie chillingly real, Alex, or is it just the hyper?
It's a Tony Scott movie.
Yeah, but doesn't mean is it? And it is an honest question because I've heard everybody has the horror stories of what it's like across the border. There's certain ugly places in Mexico where tourists in particular are in danger. It's not exclusive to Mexico. I can tell you horror stories from Peru as well. That's just, you got to be careful when you go because there's some places where if you're not of that place, you're more vulnerable to be taken advantage of or worse. And so, I know that is a thing, but I think that there's a gap between being aware of that, being part of the truth, and then believing that the depiction of Mexico seen in Men on Fire is realistic. I don't think it is, right? There's no way.
What do you mean? In the sense of if you have a kid, they will get kidnapped?
Well, in the sense that there is almost, not even almost, there's no redeeming qualities. It's across the border. It's like fucking Mad Max. It's every single policeman is corrupt. There is no, it takes Denzel Washington killing people to even get some sort of justice.
That is a weird part of it of and just not even something we can say of our lifetimes, but, over the past 10 years, there's a clear heightened danger at border towns. Because when I was in high school, that was kind of the thing. You would go to Eagle Pass or, different parts of the state and of Texas, that is. And then you'd go over to the border town, have lunch, shop around, come back. And now there's a bit of danger attached to that. But what's universally agreed upon, and I have friends that travel there regularly, you get deep into the country of Mexico. It's, it's a modernized civilization and shit. And whereas exactly to your point here, it's painted like GTA,
that's a more apt comparison than Mad Max.
But yeah, exactly. Cops pull up, just shoot without asking questions. And man, it's that post 9/11 America where xenophobia is still moderately acceptable because of everything that happened, but close enough to where we are now. This movie's 20 years old. It's not. Yeah. This isn't a relic. It's so when you watch it now, you're like, well, what? No, I don't think so.
We say that, Alex, but I think that there are people that watch it and they believe they're watching a documentary.
They have their arms crossed and just nodding their head in agreement at things happening. Yeah, it's true. God damn, though, but this is still before the internet was so pervasive that if you wanted to, you could just see what other parts of the world were like. So you could still convince people, hey, if you go to Mexico, this is what'll happen. And yeah, who's to say? I never had that idea of it, honestly. I remember back to the first time I went to Mexico, and again, it was a border town. It was it would have been Eagle Pass, I think, that we went through. And it's another country, but it's hilarious coming from America, where everywhere else in the world we're the guns capital. And so
I think
this is a movie that celebrates that excess, and that's kind of what we're doing.
Yeah. And I will get back to that point because I think that is something that makes this movie interesting to talk about. But I guess what I'll say is, and I'm more than willing to, it's not I'm closed off on this. I can fully I'm fully open to people telling me, no, actually, dude, like these are the numbers and these are the statistics and this is how bad it is. And you don't know it because you live on the other side.
Fair. Yes.
Entirely possible. It does feel like this movie, it just overdoes it. It really, the way it is comical that it ends with that kind of like, thank you, Mexico. But really, it portrayed the country as just absolute hell for 2.5 hours before that. It feels like it's a little too much.
I could have used one line of dialogue from Walken why he chose to live there. Is like, I don't have to pay taxes, just something like that.
Still on that subject, though, William Arnold from the Seattle Post-Intelligencer says director Tony Scott's visual style is very jittery and more expressionistic than it needs to be, but he succeeds in creating an appropriately nightmarish, apocalyptic vision of the third world south of the border.
Good God.
Oh, give Tony Scott the GTA movie. I mean, if he was still alive, of course. I mean, again, you can use that and you can justify the visual style and be like, sure. But an apocalyptic vision of the third world south of the border seems a little offensive for the country south of the border.
It's that, yeah, that's because I personally know people like within the past few years that have visited like deep into the country and had like great experiences, not just like tourist spots either, not just places that are meant to drive, that type of shit. That is pretty intense. That's a pretty intense thing to hear. Again, knowing full well how dangerous like border towns are now and shit like that. My friend Danny just went there for work a few months ago, and I remember he was taking a train into the country. I was like, okay, well, be careful at the border. But, when he came back, he's like, yeah, it's fine. Just, I don't speak Spanish, but it's just a different country. I was like, that is really harsh. And that is going back to what you said, just the strange demonizing that's been done of that country to where, much like the United States, you can say, dude, can you imagine like a foreign country, the images you could paint of places like New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles? Like, yeah, it
would be like if you made a movie, like if a different country made a movie about the United States and really all it was school shootings. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be it, but no respite. Like that is the only thing, like to where it paints like that is what and that's, you live in the United States and that is a big thing in the United States. It's not, I'm not saying that wouldn't be accurate in some sense, but it also it's very much not the whole picture.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get to it. I want to finish the quotes before I make my bigger point about this, but
all right, let's go.
Let's move on from the depiction of third world countries. John Popick from Planet S magazine says Dakota Fanning's preternatural acting ability is almost frightening, and Fire, this Man on Fire, takes a big hit when her character disappears with 90 minutes left.
There were 24 kidnappings in Mexico City in the last 6 days. 4 a day.
Yeah?
Yes.
24?
24. What do you think about that, Chris?
I think that you know entirely more than you should.
Well, thank you.
Would you have preferred a version of this movie where we check in on PETA? Like, Denzel thinks she's dead, but we know for a fact that she isn't, and so we just keep checking in on her so that we get Dakota Fanning through the entire movie?
A sane 90-minute version of this movie would be just fine the way it is, but the fact that this is 2.5 hours and we don't check in with her again, we don't get one shot of her like in her fucking kennel or whatever. Yeah, it's the runtime of this movie is so much to ask and presents so many issues with the movie that likely wouldn't be there if it just stuck to a tight 90.
I feel like if you went down to 90, though, what you're going to miss is what you would cut is a lot of Dakota Fanning. You would cut a lot of those for 40 minutes, which would be a shame. let's close with Eric Childress from eFilmCritic.com, who says, unlike the recent comic book adaptation The Punisher, Creasy doesn't waste time, and when he puts on his avenging wings, watch out, because he's going to punish.
My God, that would have been the Thomas Jane Punisher.
Joe Creasy would just like absolutely obliterate Thomas Jane's Punisher.
Yeah, but his dad's Roy Scheider, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, but Denzel has Walken as his sidekick.
That's true.
All right, so look, it's an action movie. It's a, I don't want to call it brainless, but it not in a bad way. But it's in like, if you're going to Man on Fire, expecting a nuanced analysis of the problem of violence at the border, you're going to watch that movie for the wrong reasons, right? Like there was, I think it's in Gunter's Corner, that, you know, there was a quote that was like, oh, it's a complex issue and it doesn't address it properly. It was like, well, it's not meant to. It's just an action movie where Denzel Washington goes on the warpath because something bad happens. And so I don't want to put like unfair expectations on the movie, but I think because of where we are in the world right now, it was a little more jarring than it was maybe the first time I watched this movie. Because I mean, like I said, I've seen it before. It didn't make much of an impression in the sense that, like I said, I didn't even remember what happened at the end. I guess it was happening. I was like, oh, that's right. I think Denzel doesn't make it. But for the most part, I just remember the very basics. You know, he's assigned to guard this girl. She's kidnapped. And then he goes after her to rescue her.
Dog, have you ever read about the alternate ending?
No. Does he survive? Does Walken come in and save the day?
Creasy survives his injuries and confronts the voice in his office. After a tense verbal exchange, he kills both himself and the voice in a suicide bombing mirroring Fuentes' earlier demise.
So he had C4 up his ass?
Apparently. Imagine Denzel just like, you know, typing shit into his watch there and being like, ha ha, boom, you know, and then this movie's fine, bordering on the other side of that, or on the negative side of that, but that ending would probably have made me laugh so hard that I've been like, you know what, fuck it, 4.5.
I misjudged the previous 2.5 hours. It was all a big setup for a fantastic punchline.
To your point, it sucks that we live in a time where we see stuff like this and we're like, and you know, of course, the immediate response be like, oh, you're too soft, snowflakes, bullshit like that. And it's just like, well, what they're trying to say here is it's exactly what you said. There's no way I could have fucking verbalized it better than you did. Of if in France there was a movie made about, it was an action movie where, you know, one of their heroes has to go to America and it's school shootings, or fucking they're just able to get guns immediately, you know, like they're able to get an assault rifle immediately, and then someone would get offended and be like, well, it's what all America is, and it's like, yeah, well.
Hashtag not all America.
Yeah.
But look, if the movie was actually saying something, maybe wouldn't like jump out at.
Oh, look, yeah, that's the whole point. It uses it in such a disposable way. It's like the location of it is inconsequential. You could make this story work anywhere that it is, and the fact that it seems like borderline targeted is like, oh, all right, this is weird.
But, you know, we would laugh about it, or we wouldn't even think about it, if not for the fact that the anti-immigrant sentiments are so heightened right now. You know, so
yeah, but to play contrarian Alex on this one, though, one of the reasons it's also easy to fixate on is because this movie is fucking 2.5 hours.
Yes.
Like, it's something, dude, anything that is 90 minutes or less, I cannot find myself getting hung up on the things that I would versus a 2.5 hour movie, because at that point, what you're trying to say to me is that this is art, and everything that happens here is supposed to be taken intentionally and literally. Again, blue is the warmest color. It's been a while since I've gone back to that. That movie moves at a glacial pace. it has scenes that if you're not into the movie, you're going to be like, what the fuck is the purpose of this? But for someone like me who that movie works for, every single card that is played is like, yes, this is needed to make this work and this work and this work. This movie, I watch this and I'm like, okay, I know this could be 80 minutes long. I know this. But because it's this long, Tony Scott was trying to, make some sort of like Terminator 2 level piece of art. And so I am well within my rights to psychoanalyze and zoom in on every aspect of it and break down whatever the hell I want to. So that's
he's asking for it.
He exactly. he signed up for this, brother.
You haven't seen Sicario, right? Emily Blunt and
no, because if I remember correctly, that was one that wasn't that 2:30 also.
Yeah, it's really long, but that movie has some substance. I have some serious issues with it, but it's actually trying to say something about the war on drugs and about basically because Emily Blunt is the main character there, and she is kind of this bright-eyed, not jaded. She's not a police officer, but she's like an agent. I think it's like she might be a DA agent, but the entire movie is basically her realizing how corrupt everything is around her, and it's not just it's on her side and on the other side and so on. And so watching Sicario, it opens with this scene, this big sequence where they are crossing the border, and it's very tense, and there's a shootout. And my boss at the time at the theater, I remember he told me that he knew the guy that ran a theater in El Paso, and that the guy had watched the movie and had told him, like, right after, he messaged him or something. It's like, man, that's how it is. That's really how it is. And I remember thinking, no way. But maybe, I don't know. The bigger point is that then there's a sequel, which is Sicario, Day of the Soldado, or whatever it's called. And that one's directed by
Sicario, the New Nightmare.
Yes, Sicario, the New Blood. The new Sicario. It's written by the same guy, it's not directed by Denis Villeneuve. And that one felt like right-wing propaganda. That was just like a lot more of, those foreigners are coming over here and acts of terrorism and all that stuff. It was also a lot more just like a standard action movie. And so I think that there is something to be said that, like, okay, if you're going to tackle these things, maybe we're past the point where we can just do like a dumb action movie that deals with it. If you have to, if it's going to be a long movie, you have to take it seriously.
Now every mother in Mexico City with a little bit of money wants bigger and better bodyguards, my own wife included.
I hate to break it to you, but she's right. She's right.
The fucking Last Stand, man, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. That is a movie that if you wanted to, you could be like, okay, this is talking about the dangers of like an open border and, these drug lords and shit. But it's 90 minutes long. And Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a guy named Ray Owens, who's a sheriff of a southern fucking border town in Texas. So at no point do you find yourself being like, huh. Because it gives you no time to think about that.
Right.
It just goes right through it and gets right to the fucking point. And I'm glad you called it out earlier because it's exactly right. It's a very sad state of affairs that we have to, not have to, but just it's the fucking hand we've been dealt now. When we watch stuff like this, we have to think about the perspective it's coming from. And I don't think Tony Scott or Brian, whatever, the writer that we were talking about earlier, I don't think there was any ill intention. I think they just made a bad movie. And now, well, bad. It's fine. It's just way too fucking long. But to the point we're trying to make here, to any people listening to this in Hollywood, if your movie goes over 2 hours, you're opening yourself up to any level of interpretation the audience wants to take it with.
Maybe you need to introduce some shades of gray in the story. I don't think that Tony Scott, I don't know, right?
Well, it's what I was saying earlier. It was still during this time period where America #1, everywhere else, evil was fine. And then 2, where there was no social media to really speak of or anything like that. So you could just tell people this is how it is. And they would be like, yeah, sure. Why not? All right. Milk duds. That's what they would say.
I don't know what their politics like Helgeland and Tony Scott. I don't know what they are for Helgeland, but I'll tell you this, because that's the other thing I kept thinking. I was like, I can see how somebody today, just like a hardcore right winger, would point at a movie like Man on Fire or a movie like Sicario to justify why they think that America needs to close their borders. And that is not necessarily the filmmaker's fault. That is just somebody.
They would cite the dates at the end of it. Like, that's based on a true story. That man went down there and died trying to protect that little girl.
John Chrissy died for all of us. Open your eyes. All right. So, but taking out the politics or the apparent politics of it, you're still left with, I think, your biggest problem with the movie, which is that it's a revenge thriller that goes on for 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Dude, I was higher on Death Sentence than you were, but I still remember being stuck on the runtime. It's like, yeah, it's still a little bit too long. There's only so much you can do with this.
Here's the conundrum, Alex, because I think if something makes this movie special, it's the relationship between Dakota Fanning and Denzel Washington, like that friendship that develops. And part of why it's special is because they actually take the time to let it grow, right? He comes in, he doesn't want to talk to her, and then she eventually slowly wears him down. And now he's smiling a little bit. Now he's playing a little bit. Now he's training her. Now she's giving him presents. Now he's taking her to hang out with Christopher Walken. So that whole segment of the movie, I mean, it's one of the big reasons why it's so long, but it's also, for me, it feels like it's a vital part of the movie. Like, it's like, if you're not going to do that, if you're going to just basically get a lot faster to the action, then why bother? Then it's just another revenge kidnapping movie, right? Like, what makes it special is that you got this really good young actress and you got this amazing actor, and you put them together and it's working. It's like magic. And so now it's really going to hurt when they're torn apart. And at least in my case, it made me be fully behind whatever Denzel Washington was going to do. I've seen some quotes that were questioning the morality of what he does, and how it's just fetishizing violence and revenge and whatever. I don't care. In this case, I'm with the movie in the sense that, like I said, politics aside, right? It's just a movie that presents really bad people, and then there's a guy that's taking care of business. It's not telling you that the world needs to be this way. It's just saying, like, hey, this is how we have fun. You're gonna see a good guy blast away bad guys. I mean, tell me, how do you make this movie shorter? Do you just cut back on the revenge path, like this, or do you shorten those first 40 minutes when he's connecting with the little girl?
Okay, so that is clearly the dividing point with you and I, because that first act of the movie really just did nothing for me.
Oh, you're heartless.
Well, no, it's just everything you want to accomplish they did in that montage, Oh, that whole scene, it feels like it's 10 minutes where he's rubbing the bricks together. It's like, do not fear the gun. The gun is weak. Whatever he's like telling her. The revenge does go on too long. That layover at the nightclub where he kills a guy from Jersey and then the woman who reveals the other girl to him. And for all the reasons we've already mentioned, there's a truncated version of this movie that does not come across nearly as problematic as what we are discussing right now does. And even its finished product is still just something of its time. And there's a lot of redeeming qualities to it. Denzel's great and there's some great action and whatnot. But what is it? It's 3 or 4 back-to-back sequences of him going to someone and just torturing them or killing them.
Well, with variety, right? Because he gets the guy.
I did yell out loud when he blew that guy's hand off. I was like, "Oh fuck!" Like I
the brother, yeah,
audibly popped at that. Yeah,
yeah. He gets the guy at the that's tied to the steering wheel, cuts his fingers off, then shoots him. Then the guy at the club, he tortures him, then shoots him. Yeah, and then the
rocket launcher. That's at some point during that.
Right. Well, rocket launcher. It's how he gets the guy that ends up having the C4 up his ass.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
And then the brother, right? He captures the brother, blows his hand off, and threatens the pregnant ex-girlfriend. So yeah, you're right. It's like 4 different scenarios. I think maybe the problem is that it doesn't necessarily escalate. It feels like, yeah, the torture is different in each case, but it's not like he's getting nastier, right? If anything, he's getting sillier. Like, I never would have thought that sticking C4 up somebody's butt was going to be something that was going to happen in this movie or any movie. So, I mean, yeah, maybe you can take one, but here's the problem, Alex, because that's the other half of it, right? So you have the 2 promises that this movie, I think, needs to make to get me on board and make me believe that it's worth it. It's like, why did Tony Scott and Denzel Washington waste their time with a revenge movie? And the answer is 2 parts, right? One part is, because we're going to make you really care about the girl that gets kidnapped / potentially murdered. And then the other one is because once he goes on a rampage, is going to blow your mind how like out there it goes. And maybe that's where it falters. Maybe it doesn't go as far as it needs to go, to where you can see why we needed to see him do it to 4 different people before you got to the end, right? Do you think that maybe you would have enjoyed that second half more if he had been even more outrageous? Or do you think that we're already at peak outrageousness with how he is in the movie?
I'm gonna kill him. Anyone that was involved, anybody who profited from it, anybody who opens their eyes at me.
I think that going back to Death Sentence, that's kind of one of the things that made that work so well for me, is because the retribution he seeks is so visceral. And also because, the best sequence of that movie is the parking garage scene where he has to run away because he's, overwhelmed. Denzel essentially just becomes Superman in the second half of this movie.
Yes, that is a good point. He is kind of unstoppable.
Which, again, there is a version of this movie, brother, that works perfectly. It's just what we got is just a bit of a jumbled mess. And yeah, I couldn't figure out a way to work it into my contrarian's corner argument, but you're right too about Silent Hill Mom. Like, there is this very brief moment of like teased intimacy with her and Denzel. Like, okay, are they going to end up together, or what's going to happen here? And so it's
weird because you know why? At least I know I felt that way, because you have that early scene where she has sex, or where we see her right before she starts having sex with Mark Anthony. And it's like, why is that there? Other than to kind of plan in your head the idea that, yes, just so you know, reminder, she's a sexual being, and so then maybe it doesn't shock you when she has sex with Denzel Washington later on. Like, that's a very 80s move overall, but it doesn't happen, so it doesn't matter. I don't know why we needed to see her take her shirt off and get ready to ride Mark Anthony. Cut that off. That we didn't need.
Well, we got to relate to them somehow.
Oh yeah, yeah. Add spice to the narrative. I mean, you can get rid of, if you're gonna get rid of stuff, I think sadly you cut some of the colorful supporting cast that I enjoy a lot, but I think that they're like the least necessary for what I want of the story. So as much as I enjoy it, I need less of the Mexican, like the journalist and the internal affairs guy. It's cute. I like the relationship, and I like back and forth, and I like them as a plot device, and like, oh, this is how he keeps getting information, right? But it kind of feels redundant when you also have a character like Walken. Like, I think that the Christopher Walken character could have been the person that Denzel keeps calling and saying, okay, now run this plate for me, now track this bank account for me, just make it to where that's what Christopher Walken does. And he said, I'm not gonna kill again, but I will be your support guy. Man, you do that, and you're already taking care of at least 15 minutes of runtime, because you're getting rid of the journalist and their cop. Make the kidnapping thing a little simpler. If Mark Anthony is gonna be the guy behind it, then just cut out the middleman. You don't need Mickey Rourke. Again, love to see him, but you can just take him out. So it's all Mark Anthony being the mastermind. You streamline it. Maybe you can shave like a few more minutes too. You don't need to, whatever 2-3 scenes that Mickey Rourke has, you can get rid of that. But again, that's all stuff that I like in the movie. But if the goal is to make it shorter while still keeping what I think is its biggest strength, then I think that's what I would do. But you're like, no, fuck it. Let's get rid of Dakota Fanning. We don't need to bond with her for 40 minutes.
Well, I didn't say that,
She's really good, Alex. She is
Oh, yeah. Excellent.
amazing. She reminded me that I thought she was she doesn't get to do much in War of the Worlds. She's like, I think infamously, half the time she's just screaming for help. But you believe her. Like in this movie, when she's afraid, when shit's going down and she's about to get kidnapped, like she's so good at acting terrified.
And her, like the climax of her performance at the end where she embraces Creasy.
Mm-hmm.
That whole thing of I love you and you love me too. I honestly, at that point, I was like, man, the movie didn't earn this. But I was so, as soon as I thought that, I let go of that because of how great she was. And Denzel, I mean, not breaking ground here by saying Denzel Washington's a great actor. But, when he's like got the tears welling up in his eyes, it's like, I do. Yeah. And I'm going home too. It's fantastic stuff.
Did it become that meme of Vince McMahon? He tells the camera to cut because he's getting teary-eyed.
No, because at this point, I'm not going to compare myself to Vince McMahon in any aspect. But it's that's a fair play. So you had seen this before. Had you seen it upon its initial theatrical release?
No. I remember the trailer when it was coming out, and I just remember thinking, man, Tony Scott really likes close-ups. It's just getting really up there. And we will do the trailer for our warm-up video and see if that assessment holds up. But no, I didn't catch it in theaters. Honestly, I don't remember thinking it looked particularly interesting. But our friend and editor, Corey, he showed it to me. He played it, because we were roommates for a while. And I think that he was just like, all right, we're going to watch Man on Fire now. I think he likes it. And I just sat down and I watched it. And I was like, yeah, that was a movie where Denzel watched exactly what they advertised. They kidnapped the girl. He went after them. And then a lot of violence ensued. So that's it. Like, I don't really... I've thought about Man on Fire a couple times since then, mainly because I think Eddie Strait hates it. And that's come up before. Eddie, if I'm misremembering, please clear your name. But I know at least one person that hates it. So if it's not Eddie, it's somebody else. And it's, that's kind of an iconic poster. Is that accurate to say? Do you remember seeing that? Like Denzel walking towards the camera and little Dakota Fanning is like kind of behind him.
Oh yeah, that's it's the green and orange flames behind him and shit. Yeah, that's I knew that. Like I knew the poster of this easily, and having never seen the movie. And
I've seen it come up before. I'm like, yeah, that's right. I've seen that movie. It's not, it was never on the top tier of my Denzel movies or my Tony Scott movies. But it's still, it was just something I watched. So when Jamie suggested, I was like, yeah, let's see. That's the other thing I remember, that it was really long. I was like, let's see if it holds up and how I feel about it now that I'm older and wiser. Honestly, I think I probably appreciate it more. At least I see what it's trying to do or what it does differently. I appreciate it more now than I did back then. And back then I just remember drinking and watching it. I was like, yeah, and that's it. That was a movie. I think because you like horror more, it's likely that you've watched more of this type of story, like the, revenge thriller. It's probably, we discussed this in our death sentence episode. So maybe that also plays a little bit into you just being kind of underwhelmed by the whole thing, because you've seen this story play out more often than I have, maybe.
Yeah, that might be a fair assessment. The retribution and still, I could name plenty of examples where this is, something I've seen done way better. And it's not just that I'm numb to it. I hate to be such an Alex about this, but man, the runtime is just such a fucking ask, dude. There were times when the ads would, I assume we both watched this on Tubi.
Yes, that probably didn't help, man, because that adds at least 30 minutes to the movie.
Yes, and I would check the time, the little time bar at the bottom of the screen. I was like, oh my God.
It's just that head, Chris. It's a mess. Somebody hijacked the drop. The kidnapper's nephew was killed, so he killed Peter.
I was trying to figure out. I was trying to remember when we've had this conversation more recently than that sentence, and it was Unforgiven. Because Unforgiven is another movie. I mean, obviously, it's shorter and it gets there a different way, but basically,
I hope we both agree Unforgiven's a better film than Man on Fire.
Yes. And it is, I think, trying to say something about revenge and violence, even if I don't know. I think that during we tried, we had theories, and we kind of grappled with what it was saying and it wasn't saying or whatever. But just the idea that in Unforgiven, you're like, well, maybe me more than you. I was like, yeah, Little Bill is a piece of shit, so I have zero problems with him getting shot in the face at the end of the movie. Just the same way that I have zero problem with anything bad that happens to the bad guys in this movie. And that is, I think that's the catch of the revenge movies, right? That you're always going to run into the potential accusation that you're morally bankrupt because you're just saying, well, the way that we solve this problem is by killing, which is why sometimes I think often you just try to have like a one moment where the protagonist or maybe somebody next to them just questions it or makes them reflect on their path. Like here, I think, Walken, and even Denzel, like, they have some moments where they allude to their past as killers before. And, pretty early on when Denzel still has the beard and he's like, do you think we're ever going to be forgiven for what we did? And we're like, oh, that sets up something, the character. And just the fact that do you think at the end of the movie, like that final shot as he's dying, is that him coming to terms with everything he's done in his life? Like, has he forgiven himself? Because the way that he seemed to not have forgiven himself at the beginning of the movie. Or am I just being too romantic about that final shot before he dies?
I think you might be, strictly because I don't think the movie cares that much about it.
You're right. So they just say that they just have that moment at the beginning to establish that he's a badass, that he's killed a lot. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, well, I tried, Tony Scott. I tried. I was giving you the benefit of the doubt. All right. Well, I put off thinking about what I was going to give it as a rating. I think it's just going to be a square 3 stars. For all the complaining and all that stuff, I didn't have a bad time. I think Denzel can hold the screen, can hold my attention. He's just a movie star. Dakota Fanning is wonderful. At the little moments that we have her there, and I, again, morality aside, politics aside, I mean, it's just badass to see him.
Oh, absolutely.
Just deliver, justice. This sort of justice in a way. And, so I was fist pumping every time one of the bad guys got maimed and eventually killed. I'm like, sure, bring on the next one. So I'm going to land on 3 stars. How about you, Alex?
That's exactly where I'm at. 3 stars, C, possibly C plus, for a lot of the lamenting and qualms that I've presented with the film. Yeah, it's too long, but I still, you nailed it better than I possibly could have. With Denzel is there, so he's commanding, he's magnetic, and there's some really fucking fun action sequences and some really sweet violence if you're into that throughout this movie. It's not great. It's not a movie that I find myself mentally rushing back to the idea of watching again, but it's not terrible. So a C, 3 stars will be my review on Letterboxd. But I'm kind of glad I checked it off because it's a movie that I always knew its poster and never actually saw. I remember joking with you about Frighteners when you did the QVR on that. I was like, oh man, I remember the poster and the VHS box for that, and I've never actually seen it. So this one's crossed off the list, mentally at least. So
I'm sorry to inform you, Alex, that Jamie Russell hasn't given it a rating. It's just he logged that he's watched it, but no ratings, no stars, or maybe he just gave it no stars. Jamie, let us know if you absolutely hate this movie. Your score is 0.
Yeah, that's my fateful findings review. I refuse to give it a rating.
Not equipped to rate this. Let us know, Jamie. Let us know, any of you, how you feel about Man on Fire. Are we being too harsh? Are we overthinking it? Are we underthinking it? Should we be more appalled by Denzel Washington taking justice in his own hands? Are we being too sensitive about the depiction of Mexico, our neighboring country? Let us know.
Where are you going?
I'm going home, too. Going to Blue Bayou.
That's it for Man on Fire. Alex, I've spent the last at least 2 weeks telling you, I need to talk to you about what I want to do for January. And I keep forgetting. And now here we are at the part of the episode where we discuss what's coming up next. And that's what's coming up next. And we still haven't talked about it.
My God.
Yeah. Well, some of our listeners, if they pay attention, they probably know that my birthday is in late January. And so it's like, you know what? I'm going to give myself a birthday present. I'm going to force Alex to be part of it. So this is what I'm thinking. If you disagree with any of this, that's fine, because we'll just fix it on the edit. What I'm thinking is the next episode of The Contrarians, so that would drop January 21st, right? Like that's the next one. So that would be Spider-Man Far From Home, which is the follow-up to Spider-Man Homecoming, which you liked a lot. That was one of the movies that you liked when I forced an MCU journey on you. You were actually pretty happy with how that played out. The new Spider-Man and Aunt May and all that. So it's like, you know what? You should watch the sequel, which is, features Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. That alone should perk your interest. And then, of course, we're already halfway there. So I say we close January, the third episode of the month, with how they cap the trilogy with No Way Home. At this point, everybody knows, even though they haven't watched the movie, that's where they did it. They brought the other Spider-Man into it.
Okay. That's the one where that all happened.
Yes. So I also know, because we talk about it a lot, that you've seen the first Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, but you haven't seen the second one, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yes. So let's remedy that in an after hours.
Oh.
Dude, don't you want to see Jamie Foxx as Electro?
No.
Paul Giamatti as a Rhino?
Okay. I do love Paul Giamatti. Yeah.
Okay. So this is the path, right? Next episode, middle of January, Spider-Man Far From Home. After hours for that will be Amazing Spider-Man 2. And then we close with No Way Home at the end of January. And then if we can make it happen, I was talking to you about Comixology, because I think that something that always comes up whenever I talk about Amazing Spider-Man 2 is that, it's about the Gwen Stacy character and how it mirrors a lot of stuff that happened in the comics. So right now, the spoilerifically titled The Death of Gwen Stacy is free in Comixology if you have Comixology Unlimited. And then also Ultimate Spider-Man, the reboot of Spider-Man in the 2000s by Brian Bendis, it's also available on Comixology Unlimited. I think that they're two important comics to read to compare, because, obviously Amazing Spider-Man 2 and The Death of Gwen Stacy have a link, and also Ultimate Spider-Man and the Tom Holland Spider-Man have a link. And so I think if we can manage to squeeze in like a little bit of comic book talk, like either as a bonus episode or a separate after hours, that could be the after hours for No Way Home, then I think we could do that. What I'm saying is, like, most of January, Spider-Man month. And you know why? Because it's my birthday. And it's and it's going to be shortly after fucking Trump gets inaugurated. So I need something to make me feel good. So
fair.
Let's use the podcast for that. And then you can take the reins in February and you can just make me watch a horror movie or a wrestling movie. We'll figure something out.
Sounds like a fair trade.
All right. So coming up next on this feed, Spider-Man Far From Home. It's been long enough since it came out that I think I can look at it with fresh eyes and be critical of it. But that's it. That's coming up next. And then as far as our Patreon channel, real quick, Alex, January, our bonus episode exclusive to patrons is on the movie Space Sweepers. That's requested/demanded by patron fellow podcaster Ryan. For QVRs, patron Nerdrovert, Jason from I've Seen That. He's giving you the movie Worst Person in the World, which I think was nominated for Best Original Screenplay a couple years ago.
My God.
Yeah, I am getting Memories of Murder, which I want to say I bought the Criterion a couple years ago. I still haven't watched it. So, works out. And then, of course, we have Contrarians After Hours. Alex, you just proposed a joint after hours, and I say let's do it. What are we doing?
We came off of our Dragged Across Concrete episode with conflicting emotions about S. Craig Zahler, and I think it's time to just bring it home and figure out where we stand with his middle film. We've basically done a sandwich so far, talking about Bone Tomahawk and Dragged Across Concrete. So, After Hours will be a discussion about the 2017 crime action film Brawl in Cell Block 99, starring Vince Vaughn. I've already watched this, and I have very strong feelings on it, and I cannot wait to hear what Julio thinks about it.
I've heard that S. Craig Zahler is holding off on releasing another movie until we've successfully talked about his entire filmography so far. So
I'm
joke,
sure. But yeah, well, watch we cover this, and then next week, new S. Craig Zahler film coming out starring Tom Hiddleston
and Vince Vaughn in a cameo. All right, that's gonna be on the Patreon feed. Go to patreon.com/Contrarian Prime if you want to check it out. And now let's get out of here, Alex.
Let's do it. Welcome to our end credits.
Or as we usually call them, our perennial plugs.
We start off by giving thanks to the Festive Years who provide our opening and closing tracks. They kick us off with Last Stand and take us home with Summer of 99. Be sure to head over to thefestiveyears.com for any and all Festive Years needs.
Our friend and fellow podcaster Hans Rothgieser is the man behind our logo and all the art you see related to our show. Reach out to him and let him know how much you like that little tomato. His email address is mildemonios@hotmail.com and his website is mildemonios.pe. That's MILDEMONIOS. Hans, thank you for all your support.
For those interested in the regularly absurd world of professional wrestling, Joe and the boys over at latenightgrin.com have you covered. Tell them the Contrarians sent you.
And we like to close with special thanks to our social media team of Zoe Perez and Corey Ari. Each of the social media accounts we mentioned in the introduction look as good as they do because of their work.
So that'll do it for this episode of The Contrarians, where we're right and you're wrong, and we will catch you next time.
Just for old time's sake, I really don't care who you're seeing or how much money he makes a year or who he knows. Just promise me you'll wear